Welcome to this video on preparing web-based materials. We're going to be going over the fundamentals of web-based design. If the internet is to reach its full potential as an instructional strategy, teachers must come to know and understand not only how to find these resources, but how to create them as well. This presentation will be divided into two parts. In the first part, we'll become acquainted with web page fundamentals, creating and editing web pages using Microsoft Word, and designing web pages. In part two of the video, we'll be examining enhanced word processing features for preparing web pages and how to distribute the web page to your student. So we're going to go ahead and get started right away looking at creating web pages. Even modest web pages is not very difficult anymore. It's not much more difficult than creating a text-based Word document. As a matter of fact, we're going to use Microsoft Word to create our web pages. Fortunately, web page designers no longer need to work in cryptic code called HTML that was common only a few years ago. The best way to learn how to create a web page using Word is to cut, copy, and paste an existing web page and then edit it. So we're going to begin by learning more about creating and saving an HTML file. Microsoft Word can open and save web pages as easily as it can a typical word processing document. Learning the fundamentals of web page development is easier with a file that you edit than starting from scratch. And so we'll learn and practice the commands that we're going to be examining by, first of all, bringing up the Dinosaur homepage in course outcome number 5 of the Blackboard shell. You will find it under example web pages. And here's what it looks like. What I'd like you to do is open the Dinosaur homepage. And then once you do that, simply do a Control-A or a Command-A if you have a Mac, and copy the entire web page from top to bottom. From the title at the top of the page to the fair use statement that you see down at the bottom. And then open up Microsoft Word and paste the entire document and the entire text into a new Word document. For now, don't be too concerned that the images that you see, that you don't see, do not appear. You can see where the images will be shown, and we'll show you how to capture those later. For right now, once you have the entire text of the Dinosaur homepage into a Word document, I want you to go up and do a file save, actually a file save as. Entitle it the Dinosaur homepage, and be sure you save it as a web page, as you see here. As you do that, try to remember or write down both the file name, Dinosaur homepage, and the folder in which you placed it. Now that we have a web page saved as a Microsoft Word HTML file, we will use Word as the editor of choice for editing our page. Keep Microsoft Word open to the Dinosaur homepage. Or if you have closed it, then simply launch Word, browse to the folder containing your homepage of the Dinosaur, and open up the file. Be sure you open up the file and not the folder. We'll talk more about the folder in a minute, but it basically contains all of those images, all of those pictures that were on the page. They're actually two different things, and you should have both of those on in your Microsoft Word. Okay, so once you do that, I'd like you to keep the Dinosaur homepage in view as we talk about each of these editing features. Okay. As we do that, we can even practice each of the skills as we move through the chapter, as we move through the video, so that by the end of the video, you'll have the early stages of your own web-based materials and a very good start. Because you should already be fairly well versed in editing from the Word document that we looked at earlier, we're going to take a rapid walk through things like selecting the images, changing the appearance of the text and images, moving text, the undo command, and saving and previewing the web page. So just follow along with us. As with any Word document, before editing, the text or image must be highlighted or selected. So you can see that right here. Once you've selected the text or the image, then you can change the appearance of the text in exactly the same way that you did with a Word document. You can make the text bold, italic, or underlined. You can use the alignment function to left justify, center, right justify, or right align your text. You can also use the indent feature to move the text across the page. You're going to really want to use this now in creating a web page, because in a Word document it will format that for you, but on a web page you need to tell it that you want to indent your text or images. You can create bullets that we're used to doing, and finally you can experiment with creating a new font or font size. Again, it works the same way as it did in the generic Microsoft Word. Next, let's take a look at moving the text in images. I want you to find the familiar scissors. Okay, the scissors, the documents, and the clipboard icons that you can use to cut, copy, and paste text or images to a new location. When you're building an interactive web page, sometimes this is very important. So it works the same way as it did in Microsoft Word. Don't be afraid to try that. And finally, in creating web pages, you might use the undo and it's called redo command even more than you might in a typical Word document. They're available to repeat or reverse any action that might not have produced the result that you want, that you really want to see. So again, a little experimenting with that, and you'll be in really good shape. Okay, like I said, we're moving quickly through those editing features because they really are the same as they were before. With a web page, it is highly recommended that you save after you complete each of the elements as you revise, edit, create, or modify your web page. It just takes a second, a single mouse click to save a web page like it did a Word document, and it will save you considerable time, especially if you have any kind of power outage, mechanical failure, the web page doesn't look exactly the way you want it to look, or so forth. To save a web page, it works the same way. Click the Save icon on the toolbar, or you can use the File Save from the File menu. If the file's never been saved, then of course it's going to come up with a Save As window, and you can tell it, give it a new file name. You can send it to a new location, but again, remember to save your work as a web page and not a regular Word document. And then after you have finished saving the files, it's always a good idea to preview the change. So locate the folder and the file that you saved the web page in. You can see it here in this example. Click on the Word document, and now instead of launching Word, the web page should launch your default web browser and display your web page as a web page. Okay, so I think you'll find that will work very well for you. But remember, we're going to continue to do editing based on using the commands in Microsoft Word. Okay, so that's basically some of the fundamental web page designs, and you know, it's basically the simple Word document commands that we have used in the past. Now, I'm sure you've probably already figured out that if you're going to design a web page, especially as a teacher, that I'm going to give you some recommendations on what, at a minimum, ought to be on your web page. The same way as I showed you the minimum contents of visual-based materials in PowerPoint, the same ways I showed you minimum requirements in a text-based handout. We're going to give you some suggested minimum elements that ought to go on any good web page. Now, again, you're the instructor. You can decide whether or not you're going to put these elements on your web page, but here's what we're suggesting. Your web page ought to have at least a banner title and image, which leads into the topic of the lesson and helps the student recognize that, that this is part of the lesson materials that you're going to offer them. You should offer an introduction, a brief explanation of the lessons, and maybe some of the sequence that the students ought to follow as they go through your web page. The teacher should let the students see the actual learning objectives that are going to be used to evaluate their understanding. Okay. You should have some additional web pages for student exploration. So, for example, if a student gets done with your web pages early and they'd like to go out and learn a little bit more about the subject, these student exploration pages are an excellent way for you to offer some additional pages that are still on the internet. And then you should also include in your web page, and you'll see it in our dinosaur homepage example, the criteria for grading the outcome of the lesson, what they should be doing. Maybe you have a little quiz that you're going to offer them in a Word document. Maybe you're going to have them answer a question and send it to you as an email attachment. Whatever criteria you're going to use to grade the outcome of the lesson should appear somewhere on this web page. And then finally, one of the sure signs of a well-designed web page is the inclusion of author information. And I show you the example here. It shows that you're kind of proud of your page, right? And that the contents that you are offering have at least been validated as contributing to the lesson objectives that you're presenting, and that you are a colleague who promotes lifelong learning and maybe even connections. Maybe somebody will watch your video and use the email address that you see down here to contact you and maybe talk to you a little bit more about the lesson that you're presenting. Finally, the address block, and that's what we call this area down here, furnishes some of the policies about using the materials that you're creating. If you don't care whether the person that's watching this, maybe another teacher, is using your material, then let them know that right off the top. You know, permission is granted for unrestricted use of this material. I don't need copyright release. I don't need fair statement issues. Just feel free to use the material to help your students learn even more. Okay, so those are some of the issues in designing the web page. Okay, and so let's kind of wrap up the first part of this and talk. The video that we had, like I said, is in two parts. We've completed part one on some of the web page fundamentals, creating and editing a simple web page, and some of the elements to consider when you're designing web pages. Don't think this is the end of it. We've got a lot more to cover here. But since it takes a little bit longer than 15 minutes, we're going to split this into two parts. In the second part of our video, we're going to examine enhanced features that bring to life the web page and does some very cool things that are over and above some of the fundamental features that we talked about already. So when you get a chance, go ahead and finish practicing what we have already covered in part one. Save your web page, and then when you're ready, you can launch part two, and we'll talk about some of the enhanced word processing features for preparing web pages. We'll also, before we quit, we'll also be looking at how to distribute that web page to your students. So a lot to cover in part two. Thank you for your attention.